The moment I walked through the door, every eye in the room locked onto me. Not the curious kind of staring you get when someone new shows up. This was different. This was the kind of staring that measures you, calculates you, decides whether you are prey. I am Nora Calloway, 19 years old, 5'4" on a good day. I had been selected as the first human exchange student at the Varick Institute on Kellen 4, a planet where the dominant species stood between 7 and 9 feet tall, had bone-reinforced skin, and settled academic disputes by challenging each other to physical dominance trials in the courtyard. The selection committee back on Earth had called it a historic moment, a bridge between species, a shining example of interstellar cooperation. Nobody told me I would be walking into a room that felt like the inside of a predator's mouth. There were 23 students already seated when I arrived. All Vareckian, all built like geological formations. Their skin ranged from deep charcoal to pale stone gray. Their eyes were wide and amber, and they communicated with both voice and a subtle rumbling vibration through their chests that I could feel in my teeth from across the room. The instructor, a towering female named Dura Voss, had glanced at me when I entered, said nothing, and returned to the display panel at the front. That was the entirety of my welcome. I found the seat designated for me near the back. It had been fitted with a smaller chair, presumably because whoever placed it there understood I could not climb into the standard Vareckian seating without a ladder. I sat down. My feet did not touch the floor. I did not look at anyone. The student beside me, a male named Grath, leaned slightly toward me. His voice was low but not quiet enough. In Vareckian, which I had spent 14 months learning and still only understood at about 70% capacity, he said, "It has no ridge markings, not even the juveniles. What classification is it?" Someone 2 rows ahead answered without turning around. "Substandard biological, the Earth delegation. I heard they sent the smallest one they had." Soft laughter moved through the room like a current. I understood every word. I did not react. I opened my study interface, pulled up the day's material, and began reading. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest, but my face was still. 14 months of Vareckian language immersion had also included 4 months of cultural briefings, and one of the most important things I had been told was this. On Kellen 4, stillness is not weakness. Stillness is calculation. They respect those who do not move until they choose to. So I chose not to move. For 3 weeks I was invisible. I attended lectures. I completed assignments. I scored in the upper third of the class on every written evaluation, which seemed to confuse Dura Voss in a way she found professionally inconvenient. She never commented on it directly, but I caught her checking my results twice on the second week, as if the numbers had made an error she needed to locate. The trouble started because of Perrin. Perrin Stax was the highest-ranked student in the cohort. In Vareckian academic culture, rank was not just a number. It was a social position backed by physical standing. Perrin had earned his rank by defeating the previous holder in a formal dominance trial during the second semester of the previous year. He was broad even by Vareckian standards. His ridge markings were deep and symmetrical, and he spoke with the particular slowness of someone who had never needed to hurry because nothing around him moved faster than he allowed. He had ignored me for 3 weeks the way you ignore furniture. Then I scored higher than him on the theoretical combat applications examination. I did not plan this. The exam covered probability modeling in field engagements, logistics optimization under constrained resources, and decision tree analysis under pressure. These are things humans have been studying intensively for centuries. I had grown up playing strategy games before I could read full sentences. I had written my university entrance thesis on resource allocation models in asymmetric conflict. The exam was, in a way, designed precisely for a brain like mine, even if nobody here knew that. When Dura Voss posted the results on the shared display, Perrin's name appeared second. Mine appeared first. The room went very quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. The kind that comes just before something breaks. Perrin stood up slowly. Vareckians do not rush when they are serious. Rushing is for things that are frightened. He walked to the display, looked at the results for a long moment, then turned and looked at me. His amber eyes were flat in the way that meant he was not angry yet but was deciding whether to be. "There is an error," he said. Dura Voss did not look up from her panel. "There is no error. The substandard biological scored above my ranking." "Yes," said Dura Voss, "it did." Another student, a female named Calla Reth, who sat near the front and had never spoken to me directly, but had on 3 occasions moved her chair slightly away from mine when I sat nearby, now turned in her seat. "Perrin, it probably memorized patterns. It does not understand the material. It simply recognized surface structure." I looked at Calla when she said this. I did not say anything. I just looked at her. She looked away first. Perrin had not moved his eyes from me. Explain your highest scoring answer, he said. Not a question, a test. The room became the kind of still that has weight to it. I set down my interface stylus. I stood up, which on account of my height meant I was still shorter than every seated Varekian in the room, and I began to explain. I walked through the decision tree I had constructed, the probability weights I had assigned to each branch, the 3 competing resource models I had compared before selecting the most efficient one, and the specific historical engagements I had drawn on to calibrate my estimates. I spoke for approximately 4 minutes. I spoke in Varekian, not in the translator-assisted common tongue that I was technically permitted to use. I spoke clearly, and without hesitation. When I stopped, the room was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Perrin's jaw tightened. The ridge markings along his cheekbones darkened slightly, which in Varekian physiology is an involuntary stress response. You have been coached, he said. Someone prepared these answers for you. No one prepared my answers, I said. That is not possible. And yet, I said, here we are. Something shifted in the room. I felt it before I understood it. Several students exchanged glances. One of them, a large male named Dorn who sat in the second row and had previously demonstrated his opinion of me by placing his bag on my designated chair every morning until I moved it myself, sat up straighter. Not in a threatening way, in the way that someone sits up when they are paying attention to something for the first time. Perrin stepped toward me. One step, slow and deliberate. You are challenging my standing, he said. This was not an accusation in the ordinary sense. On Kalon 4, in this context, this was the opening of a formal process. If I said yes, we would be in a dominance trial within the hour, which would last until one of us submitted or could not continue. Perrin weighed roughly 4 times what I did, and had a skeletal structure that could withstand forces that would turn me into a medical situation. If I said no, I was conceding the academic result. The score would be reclassified, my standing returned to the bottom, and for the remaining 8 months of my exchange program, I would be furniture again. Not even furniture. Furniture is neutral. I would be a cautionary example of something that did not belong. I said, I am not challenging your standing. I earned a score. The score stands because the answers were correct. If you believe the answers were incorrect, demonstrate the error. Another student made a sound I had not heard before from any of them. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was the Varekian equivalent of a sharp inhale. Surprise with a specific flavor of it. The flavor that comes when someone says exactly the right thing in exactly the wrong situation. Perrin's expression changed. The flatness in his eyes moved toward something sharper. You would redirect a dominance challenge to an academic one. I am a student, I said. So are you. We are in a classroom. This is an academic institution. Yes, that is exactly what I would do. Kalareth made a noise that might have been a laugh. She suppressed it immediately, but it had already happened. Perrin looked at her. She looked at the floor. He looked back at me. Then demonstrate, he said, that you understand the material and did not simply recognize patterns. This is the moment I had not planned for and had been preparing for simultaneously my entire life without knowing it. Because here is the thing about humans that I think other species sometimes do not fully account for. We are not the biggest. We are not the fastest. We do not have bone-reinforced skin or ridge markings, or the ability to vibrate our chests in frequencies that resonate with another person's ribs. What we have is this strange, almost embarrassing tendency to become completely unreasonable when someone tells us we cannot do something. I said, give me the hardest question you know. Perrin stared at me for one long second. Then he asked it. It was a multi-layered logistics scenario, involving 3 competing factions, asymmetric resource distribution, and a collapsing environmental variable on a 7-day timeline. It was the kind of question designed to demonstrate the limits of linear thinking. It required holding several contradictory truths simultaneously, and finding the action that remained optimal across all of them. He asked it because he was certain I would fail. I answered it in 11 minutes. I drew the decision framework on the room display. I showed my reasoning at each branch point. I identified the 3 places where intuitive answers would produce worse outcomes than counterintuitive ones, and I explained why. When I finished, I set the stylus down on the display ledge and turned back to face the room. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Dorn, from the second row, said one word. I will not write it here because it does not translate cleanly, but it was a Varekian term used to acknowledge someone who has done something that should not have been possible and did it anyway. It is not a compliment exactly. It is more like recognition. It is what you say when something recalibrates your understanding of what is real. 3 other students said it after him. Perrin stood very still. The ridge markings on his face had returned to their resting color. His expression was unreadable for a moment, and then something in it settled, the way a surface settles when the ground stops moving. He looked at me with a directness that was different from the measuring look at the beginning. This one was not calculating whether I was prey. This was something else. He said, "Where did you learn to think like that?" I said, "I am human. We have been surviving things that should have killed us for about 300,000 years. We had to get good at this." He was quiet for another moment. Then he turned and walked back to his seat. Dura Voss, who had not looked up from her panel through the entire exchange, said in the same flat instructional tone she used for everything, "The results stand. If there are no further procedural objections, we will continue with today's material." There were no further objections. When the session ended and students filed out, Kalareth paused beside my small chair, and she looked at me for a moment. I looked back, and she said, "You knew from the beginning that we were talking about you." "Yes," I said. "And you said nothing." "Not then," I said. "There was no reason to, yet." She considered this, then she nodded. Once, the way Varekians nod when they are filing information under a new category. She walked out. Dorn paused as well. He picked up my bag from the floor, which I had knocked off my chair at some point during the exchange with Perrin, and set it back on the seat without comment. Then he left. I sat alone in the empty room for a few minutes before the next cohort arrived. I stared at the display where my reasoning still glowed on the screen, half erased, the framework of it still visible. Outside the window, the pale blue light of Kellen 4's afternoon sun came through the panels and fell across the floor in long, flat angles. Somewhere below, in the courtyard, I could hear the sounds of students moving through their between-session routines, their footsteps heavy and deliberate on the stone. I had arrived on this planet as furniture. I was going to leave as something else entirely. I did not yet know the Varekian word for what that was, but I was already looking it up.